Hello everyone, and welcome to my back porch this Sunday morning. In today's video, I'm going to address the topic of essay writing a term paper for the semester. This is a topic that came up this week with my students. I work with my students this week. Before I get started, let me introduce myself. I'm Ruth Bomar. I'm an academic coach. I work with college students one-on-one. I help students reach their academic goals. Many of my students carry a learning disability or ADHD, or not. You don't have to carry a diagnosis of a learning disability or ADHD to benefit from working with an academic coach, and this is why. When in a coaching relationship, we're talking about change, and I help my students get from point A to point B. Point A being where you are now, and point B being where you want to be. Since I work with college students, most point Bs are the end of the semester and the grades you want to earn by the end of the semester. So when it comes to change that you have to make in order to reach your goal, usually when working with college students, those changes fall in three categories. One is executive functions, which is thinking about thinking. It's planning, organizing, time management. Time management seems to be the keystone skill and habit that everything else builds on, but it's not exclusively time management. There's so much more to executive functions than simply time management. But time management is not. It's plenty. So many things build or hinge on time management. The next category of change that students need to embrace when it comes to getting from point A to point B is very specific and strategic study techniques. And those are customized based on the task. Depending on what you're studying, that's how you study, and also depending on the learner, the skills you already have, the knowledge you already have, your preferences that are specifically yours, uniquely yours. The third category of change is stress management. We can't ignore stress. If stress is not managed appropriately, then it will interrupt our ability to learn and to manage time. So hence, you don't necessarily have to carry a diagnosis to benefit from working with an academic coach. Now let's go ahead and get started on the topic of writing an essay or writing a major paper for the semester. We're right about now, most of us are in week 11 or 12 of the semester, and many students have one more paper to write and then the final, and then they're done for the semester. So this paper is due in about 2 weeks, maybe week 14 or 15 of the semester, and that's one of the topics that I addressed this week with one of my students. So this particular student, she had to write a paper, and her main obstacle was procrastination. So when it comes to procrastination, there's two things I want to tell you about. Usually we procrastinate because the task is too overwhelming. The task is too scary, too complex. So if that's the case, then you focus on just the very next step. Like for example, for me, when I was working on my Ph.D. and I was just stuck because of the complexity and the magnitude of the task, in order to find my start button, I just looked at the very next step. Like, for example, for me, it was just find the article. I knew I had the article, and I just had to find it. Once I found it, I needed to print it. So just the very next step will help you find your start button when the reason for the procrastination is overwhelmed by the size of the task. The other reason we tend to procrastinate is when the task is unpleasant. Maybe we think the task is dumb or insulting, or it has bad memories, or it leaves a bad taste in your mouth, or we're just trying to avoid the task because it makes us roll our eyes. When we think about the task, we just roll our eyes, we think it's dumb. So if that's the case, if it's a tedious task and we just don't want to be bothered with it, then the way you find your start button for that situation is to remember your why. Remember the big picture. For this particular student, her why was a 3.5 GPA. Her goal was to get a 3.5 GPA, and getting a good grade on this paper was going to help nudge the needle toward that GPA. So then we parsed out, what does a 3.5 mean? Because 3.5 in itself doesn't mean anything. But what does a 3.5 mean to her? So she was able to articulate and express the meaning, the value of the 3.5, what it would mean to her and her family, and how she would spend her summers, and how she would feel about herself, and just the big why of the 3.5. So now she could find the motivation to actually get started on this paper that wasn't due for another 3 weeks. Now that you can get started, now we have this. How do you start writing a paper? Your first step is to look at the assignment sheet. Many times the assignment is embedded in the syllabus, or it's in a separate assignment sheet. So print it up, go ahead and print up the assignment, and then reread it and reformat what the assignment is. For example, we read the assignment and then write on another piece of paper, what does that mean? What are the requirements? What does this assignment have to include? What is the professor looking for? What is the purpose of the assignment? So rewrite all of that on a separate sheet of paper, either in bullet point form or in a diagram. Use arrows, bubbles, squares, circles. Rewrite the assignment requirements so that it makes sense to you. It has to make sense to you. You have to be able to articulate, why am I writing this paper? What's the purpose of this paper? What will this paper accomplish? So the next step would be to make the connection between the assignment and the course objective, the course description. So you can go to your syllabus and reread the first portion of your syllabus. Should have the course description and the course learning objectives. Sometimes they're stated as learning outcomes, and make the connection between the assignment and the reason for the course. What does the professor want the students to know by the time they leave this course? Make the connection between objectives and the courses and the assignment, the paper. The next connection I want you to make is to go back to the syllabus, and at the end of the syllabus, you will tend to find the lecture schedule, the dates, the title of the lecture, and the assigned readings. And there's going to be a sequence, a progression of all the lectures that have been addressed between the beginning of the semester and the time you turn in your paper. So look at those lecture titles, those lecture topics, and the related readings, and see how the ideas that were presented connect to your paper. And those ideas can be content for your paper. They could be details, facts, or examples to include in your paper. So now those are 3 things you're going to do before you even start writing. Now, the thing about writing is it takes thinking, and thinking takes time. Thoughts grow in your mind, just like a plant or a little flower will grow. It takes time for it to grow. So you want to start your writing your paper with enough time for your thinking to grow and mature. But your writing is going to reflect your thoughts. So if you haven't given this topic too much thought, then your writing is going to reflect it. Your writing will be shallow. One place to start when you write is by definition, paraphrase, and example. That's a really good way to get started, to get the juices flowing for writing an essay for your professor. But if that's the extent of your writing, definition, paraphrase, example, if that's as far as you go, I mean, that's good, but it's not enough for college writing. Once you get your definition, your paraphrase, and examples, then you want to talk that over with your prof. You want to go check in with your prof, talk to him about the ideas you're thinking about, what definitions you have come up with for these ideas, explanations for these ideas, and get feedback from your prof. That is an excellent step that is often overlooked when you're writing a paper. Most of my students write papers at the college level. So then you want to come back and keep on writing. So now we're looking at relationships between it. We've already established definitions, explaining it in your own words, giving some examples. Then you want to be thinking about how these ideas connect to other ideas. It could be previous knowledge, it could be how they're the same, how they're different, how they support one another, how they are conditions for something else. So you want to look at the relationships among ideas. Hence, you want to look at your lecture topics and see how the lecture topics are related to the idea that you are presenting in each of your paragraphs. So what am I talking about? What are the steps? Let's recap real quick. One is rewrite your assignment. Make sure you really understand what the assignment is. Rewrite the requirements of your assignment, the components. That's one. Number two is revisit the purpose of the class, the course description, the learning objectives, learning outcomes, and see how it connects to the requirements of the assignment. Third step is revisit your lecture titles and the related readings to each lecture topic so that you can see how the progression of the lectures support the assignment you've been given and support what you're writing about, your topic, your thesis. Then the fourth step is start writing some kind of rough draft. Write down what you know. You'll be surprised how much you already know about the topic. Just brainstorming, just say what you know about the topic. You probably already know a lot about the topic. Just get it down on some kind of rough draft and go visit your prof and get feedback. So now you've got feedback from your prof from over a rough draft of ideas. So when I say feedback, that doesn't mean that you go show your professor your rough draft and ask him, is this okay? Because essentially you're asking your professor to grade your rough draft. And that's not the purpose. You're not ready for a grade. You just need to check your thinking. You need to check the progression of your logic, the growing of your ideas. So now that you've checked in with your professor, you want to revisit all your resources. So your resources could be articles that your professor is requiring you to read. Your resources could be your notes from your lecture, could be the readings that are associated with the lecture. So whatever your resources are, maybe your professor asked you to do an interview with an expert, or maybe your professor asked you to go make an observation and jot down all your observations. So you recheck your resources and enrich your writing. Make sure your writing has plenty of support for what you are saying. So if you're making a statement, you want to support it with facts, details, examples, and could be supported with theories that were addressed in your lecture, support it with historical development from the textbook, etc. Whatever applies to your topic, whatever you're writing about. Now, another step, I would ask you to check in with your professor multiple times in the writing process, which means you got to get started now. If your paper is due in about 2 weeks or 3 weeks, you need to get started now so that you can check in with your professor at least twice before you turn in your paper and get feedback on your ideas. Remember, don't ask your professor, is this okay? Ask your professor about ideas, what you're thinking. Now, one more step in writing your paper is check in with the writing center. Make an appointment with a writing center. Most universities have a writing center. This is their most popular time. Everyone is checking in with a writing center right now. So go ahead and make an appointment and visit your writing center. I recommend that you go talk to them face to face as opposed to turn it in online. Because writing requires a back and forth dialogue where you, the writer, are interacting with your editor or your proofreader or whoever you're doing your review, giving you feedback, and get some feedback from them. So I recommend you visit the writing center in person and ask them specific things like, please check for transition words or transition sentences. Please check for coherency, making sure that everything in my paragraph belongs in that paragraph. It's an organization component of writing. So remember, when you're paragraphing, all the same ideas belong together. You don't want the ideas scattered all over the place in your paper. So those are the kinds of questions you want to ask the writing center. Hence, writing takes time. And so it's when you turn a paper in, It's going to reflect time. And so I recommend you get started now. This is Ruth Bomar, your academic coach.